Jurassic Park is the movie that changed visual effects forever. Every digital creature you've ever seen since, every Gollum, every Na'vi, every Marvel anything, it can trace part of its DNA back to this movie. And Jurassic Park has about 6 minutes of computer-generated dinosaurs in the entire film. 6. That's it. This film changed visual effects forever, and it has a lot less CGI than a lot of modern commercials. But here's the part that should really break your brain. 30 years later, when the technology has moved somewhere Spielberg could never have dreamed of back in 1993, well, the dinosaurs that they created back then, they still look more real than creatures that were made yesterday. So, let's figure out how and why. I'm Eddie, and this is Eddie P at the Movies, where we figure out how movies are built and what they're actually about. So we're just going to do a quick recap of the story of Jurassic Park and then jump into the themes of the film. So in Jurassic Park, a billionaire named John Hammond finds a way to bring dinosaurs back to life. He has a bunch of men digging for mosquitoes trapped in amber. The mosquitoes have dinosaur blood stuck in their bodies. Then some fancy scientists extract the blood. They use super science techniques to patch the holes in the dinosaur DNA with a little frog DNA, and voila! Animals that have been gone for 65 million years are now brought back to life. And our billionaire, Mr. John Hammond, he builds a theme park on an island off the coast of Costa Rica to house these mythic beasts. But before he can open the theme park, his investors, well, they get a little bit nervous. So he brings in a team of experts to sign off on the park. A paleontologist named Alan Grant, a paleobotanist named Ellie Sattler, and a mathematician, or as he calls himself, a K-itician, named Ian Malcolm. They arrive at the island and they witness the impossible. They're only a stone's throw away from real living dinosaurs, and for about 10 minutes it's the single greatest thing any human being has ever built. But then the power goes out, the electric fences go down, and the animals escape. And then the park, which is designed to sell wonder to its guests, well, it turns into a place where guests are the main course for dinner. Everyone who survives the island getaway, well, they agree on one thing. This place should never have existed. That's the plot. That's your 30,000 foot view. So, without further ado, I've always wanted to say this. Welcome to Jurassic Park. In our frame of reference video on Jurassic Park, we pulled apart what the movie's actually saying, what it's really about. But this video is about how the film was actually put together, because the how is every bit the miracle as the what. So first things first, we gotta put this out there. When this movie was made, this was the peak of Steven Spielberg's career as a director, and I don't say that lightly. By 1993, Spielberg had already made Jaws, Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T., Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and The Color Purple, just to name a few of his hits. He was already the most commercially successful filmmaker in the history of the craft. But Jurassic Park is the film where every single tool in his arsenal fires at the same time. The framing, the camera movement, the pacing, the emotional manipulation, and the sheer technical ambition. Everything he'd already learned in 20 years of filmmaking, it converges in this one movie. So let's pull apart how he gets it done. Spielberg once said that he sees the world through a 21mm lens, which is a wide-angle lens. And that's not just a technical detail, it's actually a philosophy. So when you shoot wide, you're not showing the audience a face or an object, you're showing them an entire world. The frame is enormous, so the environment, well, it surrounds the characters in the movie. The audience is not watching a close-up of someone's reaction, they're standing in the room. They're on the island, they're in the park. And this is why Jurassic Park feels the way it does. You're not watching dinosaurs on screen, you're standing next to them. Spielberg puts you in the world first, and then he lets the world come alive around you. And when he does decide to go in for a close-up, well, it really means something, because he's earned it. The close-up of Grant's face when he first sees the Brachiosaurus, the close-up of Malcolm's eyes when he realizes the fences are down, the close-up of Tim's face pressed against the glass as the T-Rex breathes on the window. Every one of these moments, it hits you with a punch, because Spielberg has been holding them back. He shows you the wide world, the scope, and the scale, and then in one cut, he drops you onto a human face, and then us as the audience, well, we feel everything that that person feels. That restraint is what separates a good director from a great director. So, let's talk about genre. So there's something that people don't really clock when they watch Jurassic Park. It's not one genre, it's actually three. So it is very much an adventure film. You know, the T-Rex chasing the Jeep, man, it still gives me goosebumps. And then we have Grant and the kids climbing the electric fence. We have the Brachiosaurus sneeze. All these scenes have the energy and momentum of an Indiana Jones type film. They move, they accelerate, and they make your stomach drop. However, Jurassic Park is also a science fiction film. The lab sequences, when Dr. Wu explains how the dinosaurs are actually engineered, you know, we got that DNA animation, we have the amber and the mosquitoes. Spielberg shoots those kind of like a documentary. It's more clinical and precise, which makes it really believable. He makes the impossible science feel so real that by the time you see a living dinosaur, you've already accepted the premise. And to round out the trio, Jurassic Park is also a monster movie. The T-Rex attack in the rain, the raptors in the kitchen, the Dilophosaurus killing Dennis Nedry. These are pure horror. And Spielberg is shooting a PG-13 quote-unquote family film, and he drops in these sort of slasher sequences right in the middle of it. And no one complains about it because they're so well executed. Three genres, one film, and the transitions he makes between them are so seamless that the audiences never really notice the shift. And here's what makes Mr. Spielberg a genius and not just a great filmmaker. He lets the film breathe. Between every dinosaur sequence, there are these really deep conversations, you know, real ones that people would have in a situation like that. Malcolm and Hammond arguing about the ethics of creation, Grant and Sattler debating whether or not to endorse the park, Wu and Malcolm on genetic engineering. These scenes are not filler between the moments of intense action. They're the reason the action actually matters. Without them, the T-Rex is just a big lizard that's chasing a car. Now, Jurassic Park is so well shot, I can't let this episode go without giving the cinematographer his own section in this video. The man who shot Jurassic Park is named Dean Cundey. Let's give him his flowers. Now, Cundey shot the movie Halloween in 1978, he shot the movie The Thing in 1982, and he did the entire Back to the Future trilogy, which some people argue is still the best trilogy in the history of cinema. Plenty of competition, I love Lord of the Rings, and there's other things that can compete, but let's look at Back to the Future for a second.
Dr. Brown, I brought this note back from the future and now it's erased.
Of course it's erased!
But what does that mean?
It means your future hasn't been written yet. No one's has. Your future is whatever you make it. So make it a good one. Both of you.
He was also the DP on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So we can see from the jump that this is a man who spent his entire career figuring out how to photograph things that are not really there. There's a killer hiding in the shadow. There are aliens made out of latex. There are cartoons interacting with real actors. So he was the perfect DP for a film about dinosaurs that don't actually exist. And what Cundey does in Jurassic Park is honest, motivated, natural light. When Grant sees the Brachiosaurus for the first time, the frame is bathed in this warm afternoon sunlight, and the exposure is wide open. So there's no stylized color, there's no filters doing the emotional work for us. It's just the tropics on a clear day. It looks kind of like a nature documentary shot in the field. And that's not an accident. You know, if you shoot a dinosaur under stylized lighting, then the audience knows that they're watching an effect. But if you shoot it under the same sun that would fall on, say, a horse in an open field, then the brain accepts that this animal, being the Brachiosaurus or any other dinosaur, well, then it's real. And if you look at the T-Rex breakout at night, what Cundey does is he lights the entire sequence with one damaged floodlight and the rain. That's the whole plan. One source, everything else is in shadow. And that one decision does three things at once. Number one, it builds terror, because you can't see so much of the world that may be hiding other monsters. It also hides the seams between the animatronic and the CGI dinosaur. And then, to cap it all off, it saves the production a fortune when it comes to camera setups. That's a DP solving three problems with one lighting choice. The other Cundey signature that no one notices in this movie are the flashlights. So when Lex looks at the T-Rex in the eye and the flashlight causes the Rex's pupil to contract, and my God, what an amazing bit of filmmaking. And then we have Muldoon and Ellie when they're at the T-Rex pen after the large beast is broken loose. And then we have Ellie when she's trying to turn the park's power back on. And then, of course, Nedry when he's trying to find his way to the dock. The light in the frame comes from a practical flashlight that the actor's actually holding. You can see the beam. You can see where it's coming from. There's no magical soft key lights arriving from nowhere. So every light on the island has a source, and we as the audience, we can point to it. That's what grounds this film in physical reality, which once again makes you believe the dinosaurs when you see them. And a lot of people, when they watch movies, they don't think about the cinematographer. But the reason dinosaurs in Jurassic Park still look the way they do, well, that has a lot to do with the way that Dean Cundey shot the whole film, more like a wildlife crew was running the show. And they were just going to film real animals running around this island. That quiet, disciplined, motivated light, well, that's the entire foundation for the visual language of this movie. And insofar as the other people who create the dinosaurs, like Winston's animatronics and ILM CGI, their creations became real because Cundey lit the world around them. If this video is the kind of thing you want more of, you know what to do. Alright, so let's break down these 6 magical minutes that changed everything. We gotta talk about the effects, because what Spielberg and his team did, what they pulled off in 1993, is arguably one of the most important technical breakthroughs in the entire history of cinema. The final film, Jurassic Park, the one that brought dinosaurs back to life, it only has about 6 minutes of computer-generated dinosaurs in the actual final film. 6 minutes in the entire movie. Now, ILM, which stands for Industrial Light and Magic, they created fewer than 60 CGI shots for the entire movie. The rest of the film has about 9 minutes of on-screen dinosaurs, and they were built by Stan Winston and his team using full-scale animatronics. So just think about that for a moment, because the film that changed visual effects forever, well, it has less CGI than a lot of modern television commercials. And here's the really wild part. It almost wasn't CGI at all. So Spielberg originally planned to use stop motion for the walking dinosaurs. He hired a guy named Phil Tippett, who's a legendary animator, and he was behind those Imperial walkers in The Empire Strikes Back. So the plan was really simple. Winston builds the dinosaurs at full scale for the close-ups, and then Tippett goes and animates miniatures for the wide shots. These are very traditional, or at the time, traditional filmmaking tools. But then, a rogue animator changed everything. A gentleman named Steve Williams, who was a CGI artist at Industrial Light and Magic, without anyone's permission, on his own time, built a test of a fully digital dinosaur walking across a field. And when Steven Spielberg saw it, everything changed. The stop-motion plan was dead in the water. CGI would create the walking dinosaurs. And Phil Tippett, the man who just lost his job to a computer, he watched that test footage and he said one sentence: "I think I'm extinct." Spielberg liked the line so much he gave it to Ian Malcolm in the film. Life imitating art, imitating life. But here's the thing most people miss. Spielberg did not choose between practical and digital. He blended them seamlessly in the same scenes, sometimes in the same shots. The velociraptors in the kitchen are 3 different things depending on the shot. Men in suits for the wide movement, animatronic puppets for the close-ups, particularly of the head and the claws, and CGI for the full body shots that a puppet couldn't move fast enough for. As an audience, we never notice the switches because the lighting and the texture as well as the movement are matched, and they're matched so precisely that our brain can't find the seam between them. And on to one of the greatest moments in the film that was actually an accident. The full-scale T-Rex animatronic weighed thousands of pounds, and during the rain scene, it actually malfunctioned. This was because the foam rubber skin soaked up so much water, and the puppet started shaking on its own. It was moving in a way that no one had programmed. Now, the crew was terrified, but Spielberg decided to keep it in the film because it looked more alive than anything they'd already planned. An accident became the most realistic movement in the entire movie, and that's why the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park still look better than most CGI made 30 years later, because they're not entirely digital. The weight of Winston's animatronics, it grounds the creatures in a physical reality. The fluidity of Industrial Light and Magic CGI gives them motion a puppet could never pull off. Neither tool alone would have been enough for this movie, but together they made something that never existed on screen before. And this might be my favorite fact about the entire movie, at least from a technical standpoint. One of the most famous shots, not only in Jurassic Park, but also now in the history of film, well, it's not actually a dinosaur, it's not a puppet, it's not even a pixel. It's a cup of water on a dashboard in a car that starts to ripple. Boom, boom. Something enormous is coming, and we feel it in our gut long before we ever see it. And you know how they pulled it off? It was a guy with a guitar string. So how did this come to pass? This is actually pretty cool stuff. Steven Spielberg calls his effects supervisor, a guy named Michael Lantieri. He calls him from his car while he's driving, and he's listening to Earth, Wind, and Fire on his stereo. Now, the bass from the music is making his rearview mirror shake, and what Spielberg says is that's what I want. Now, create that same effect with water. So Lantieri and his team spend 3 weeks failing to make a cup of water ripple on command, because it turns out this is kind of a hard thing to do. The exact frequency changes with how much water's in the cup and how heavy it is, but then he finally cracks it by accident when he's at home and he's just messing around with his guitar. He rests a glass on the body of the guitar and he plucks a low note. It hits the right frequency and the water dances exactly the way Spielberg had described it. So, on set, they run a guitar string down through the floor of the car right beneath the cup, and a crew member just sits there out of frame and he plucks it. And that's the shot. That's the entire trick. So we have the most advanced dinosaur movie ever made, and the most iconic image, or at least one of them, is something you could do on your kitchen table. And that's the whole point of everything we've talked about thus far. Spielberg doesn't show you the T-Rex, he shows you a cup of water, and he lets your imagination build something scarier than any effect ever could. It's the same trick that made the shark that you barely saw in Jaws so terrifying. That is show, don't tell at its finest. A cup of water and a guitar string. And 30 years later, we're still talking about it. All right, now on to the music. So, as you could guess, I could do an entire episode, or maybe a few of them, on John Williams, and one day I probably will. But for this film, I just want to say something specific, because the score of Jurassic Park is not just a great score. It might be the best score of John Williams' illustrious career. And this is a man who wrote the themes for Star Wars, Indiana Jones, E.T., Jaws, Schindler's List, Superman, and Harry Potter. The idea that Jurassic Park belongs in that conversation, well, that tells you everything. The Jurassic Park theme is the sound of wonder, and that's the only way I know how to describe it, because when those horns come over the Brachiosaurus reveal, it's not just meant to accompany the moment. It's not an underscore. It is the moment. If you take the theme away from that scene, then you have people looking at a big animal. But if you put the theme in, then you have people that are witnessing a miracle. And just a personal note, a few years ago, I saw this theme performed by a full orchestra. They were doing a whole bunch of John Williams film scores at a local conservatorium. And I'll tell you this without exaggeration, it's not the same experience as hearing it in the film. When I heard it in the room, it became bigger than the movie. It reached into a part of my soul that I actually forgot was there. And I sat in that hall as a grown man, and I felt like an 8-year-old boy all over again, seeing dinosaurs for the first time. So that's what John Williams does. He doesn't just score movies, he scores your memory itself. Now, one more thing about directing we've really got to recognize in the great Steven Spielberg. Because along with his long list of accolades and skill sets, he does this better than any director who's ever lived. He knows how to direct children. Now, I don't generally like movies about kids. I usually find them quite boring. But Spielberg films them differently from any other director. He doesn't film children as accessories in some adult story. He films them as people. Now, they're small people, but they're scared people, and they're brave people. They're people with their own intelligence, their own courage, and their own way of seeing the world. If we look at Tim and Lex in Jurassic Park, they're not props. They're not there to scream and just to be rescued by some grown person. Tim knows more about dinosaurs than almost all of the adults on the island, and Lex goes on to figure out the computer system that restores the park's security and gets everyone rescued. These kids are competent and they're resourceful. And Mr. Spielberg, well, he respects them enough to put them in genuine danger and let them find their own way through it. And he does this in every film. You know, think of Elliot in E.T., or think of Short Round in Temple of Doom, and of course Jim Graham in Empire of the Sun. Spielberg understands that children experience fear and wonder at a much higher frequency than adults, because everything is louder, everything is bigger, everything matters more. And he uses that intensity to make the audience feel what the children feel. Okay, so Eddie P at the Movies, we're a movie channel. It's in the name. But in this case, I do want to touch on the book that this movie's based on, and there's a couple of reasons why. The first reason is this is a rare case where the book is genuinely great and the film is also genuinely great. But the other thing I want to touch on is the movie left out a lot of what was in the book, but in this case, I will defend it till my dying day because it had to be to get the movie right. But let's take a look at the change that I think matters most, and it ties right back to our frame of reference video on Jurassic Park. In the novel, John Hammond is a villain. Crichton described him as the dark side of Walt Disney. He was driven by greed and ego, and he was sort of dismissive of every safety concern. He was more worried about his expensive animals than the people around them. And he's careless enough to drag his own grandkids into this untested park over everyone else's warnings about what may go wrong. And at the end of the book, well, Hammond dies. He's startled by a recorded T-Rex sound, he falls down a hill, he breaks his ankle, and then he gets eaten by a pack of compies, which are these little dinosaurs. You see them in the second Jurassic Park, which is called The Lost World. But anyway, in the book, when he dies, he still dies convinced that Malcolm is wrong. Now, that's kind of a satisfying ending, especially for the book, but it's the exact ending that lets you off the hook. Because the greedy man, well, he gets his comeuppance. And then you close the cover of the book thinking, well, I'm not greedy, so this story, it's not about me. That guy got what was coming to him. But Spielberg refused to give you that. He handed most of Hammond's nastiness to the lawyer, and he cast Richard Attenborough, this really soft, gentle guy who'd played Santa Claus before. And then they managed to turn Hammond into a dreamer, a grandfather who generally wants to give the world a gift. And he let him live, because a dreamer that you love, who never has to pay for it, well, it implicates you, as in us as people, far more than a villain who gets eaten at the end of the book. The book punishes Hammond. The movie makes Hammond us as people, as the viewers. And it's the same with Dr. Grant. In the book, Grant loves kids. Spielberg invented the version of Grant who can't stand children, and he invented this as a flaw, and it became sort of the emotional spine of the film. If there's no dislike of children, there's an entire character arc that's missing. But now, with the movie, when he has those two kids asleep on his chest at the end while they're flying away in the helicopter, you can't really ask for a better end for his character and the film. That is a big change to what was in the book, but I think it gives the film its heart. So, read the novel, watch the film. They're not in competition. They're two completely different machines, each built perfectly for the job that they're trying to execute. And Spielberg knew exactly which machine he was building. So that's the craft video for Jurassic Park, underneath all the spectacle. Peak Spielberg, a DP who lit like no one else and made us believe we're watching a wildlife documentary, sort of 65 million years in the making. We got those 6 minutes of CGI, holding hands with foam and rubber and a couple of guys in suits. And of course, the greatest composer who's still alive. And a director who treats kids as people. So every single one of those choices, it points in the same direction. It's technology in the service of the story, never the other way around. And that's why it still holds up. That's the whole secret behind the technical brilliance of Jurassic Park. So jump into the comments section and let me know what effect in this movie still gets you. Is it the cup of water? Is it the goat leg falling on the sunroof? Is it that first Brachiosaurus? What is it? Just let me know, drop it in the comments. I would love to hear from you, and let me know what movie you want me to review next. I'm Eddie P. Remember, show don't tell. I will see you all next time.